the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it.
Immediately following the discovery in February 1990 of the burnt remains of Robert Ouko, Kenya's Minister of Foreign Affairs, President Moi called in a team from Britain's New Scotland Yard to investigate his death. They were led by Detective Superintendent John Troon. Troon was about 4 weeks into his inquiry when he was given testimony that appeared to mark a breakthrough. It came from a high-level diplomatic source. And once he'd heard it, the direction of his investigation changed dramatically. A file was delivered to Troon's colleague, Detective Inspector Lindsay, in Kenya. It came from Professor Ogada, Kenya's ambassador to the UN.
Professor Ogada informed Lindsay that he had been directed by His Excellency the President to hand over to Scotland Yard officers a sealed envelope which he had brought with him from Switzerland. In addition to the envelope, Professor Ogada supplied details of 2 contacts in relation to the contents, one being Mrs. Briner-Mattern, the other being her advocate in Kenya, Mr. Frank Adley of Kaplan and Stratton Advocates, Nairobi.
The file was from a Swiss-German woman, Marianne Briner-Mattern. She, together with an Italian, Domenico Airaghi, said they were directors of BAK International, a company based in Lugano, Switzerland. BAK had been selected by Dr. Ouko in 1987 when he was Minister for Industry to help restart a defunct molasses plant in Kisumu. From this time on, Troon's investigation took a dramatic turn.
I interviewed Mrs. Marianne Briner-Mattern. I interviewed her in London over a period of 3 days. Her partner was interviewed by one of my colleagues who went to Spain. She was the main person, Marianne Briner-Mattern, and she made a lengthy written statement over the course of 3 days at Scotland Yard.
From this testimony, Troon came up with a theory that senior government ministers and officials demanded bribes via intermediaries to authorize the project to rehabilitate the molasses processing plant in Kisumu. When they didn't get them, they blocked the project and BK's involvement and nominated other companies against them. Those behind the plot were allegedly Finance Minister George Saitoti, Energy Minister Nicholas Biwott, Minister of Agriculture Elijah Mangale, and indirectly President Moi. Briner-Mattern also claimed that just before he was murdered, Dr. Ouko was working on a report to be sent to President Moi that would expose the scam. Was it to get hold of this report that Dr. Ouko was silenced? This was Troon's Kisumu Molasses project theory. The original Kisumu Molasses project had begun in 1981, but within 2 years, it was $57 million over budget and work stopped. In 1987, President Moi announced that it was to be revived. If successful, it would of course be good for much-needed employment in the Kisumu area. But it was also a local political issue.
In the 1988 election, Ouko was facing a stiff challenge from a Joab Aminu. Both President Moi and Ouko knew that the molasses project would be good for votes.
So towards then in 86, 87, around about that time, Ouko, being a minister for industry, and the project being in his constituency, he wanted it revived.
An interministerial committee was set up, chaired by Dr. Ouko. They selected BAK to obtain funding for the project and to nominate companies that would ultimately complete the work.
He submitted a paper to the cabinet for revival of that project, and he recommended back Marianne and Airaghi to do the job.
In a letter to the Attorney General, Ouko made it very clear that he had the support of his colleagues.
I have discussed this matter with my colleagues, the Honourable Professor Saitoti and the Honourable Nicholas Biwott, both of whom fully support my action.
We set up a committee. I was one of the members of the committee, and we recommended, because they were talking about grant from Italy. So nobody would refuse grant. And we recommended the cabinet approved, and the cabinet sanctioned.
On November 3rd, 1987, the cabinet agreed to the proposal. But 5 months later, by the time of election in March 1988, the project had not got underway. An artful politician, Ouko had engaged 50 workers paid for by Airaghi to clear and tidy the land around the molasses plant, as local voters must have observed. After the election, Dr. Ouko was promoted to Minister of Foreign Affairs, and a newly elected MP, Dalmas Otieno, replaced him as Minister of Industry, the man now in charge of the Kisumu Molasses project. Then in November, Minister Otieno told Parliament that BAK was of doubtful integrity. 4 months later, Domenico Airaghi was arrested by immigration officers and expelled from Kenya for alleged interference with government matters. A major problem with Troon's Kisumu Molasses theory was that it was entirely based on the testimony of Briner-Mattern and Airaghi, and documents that they alone had provided. Troon admitted as much in November 1991 during the public inquiry into Dr. Ouko's murder.
So ultimately, Mr. Troon, the allegations of corruption boil down to BAK directors.
Yes, my lords, which is apparently supported by documentary evidence they have also produced.
Yes, documents written by themselves. Documents written by Airaghi and documents written by Marianne. But by and large, your principal witnesses on the allegations of corruption would be the BAK directors.
Yes, they are, my lords.
Troon said that Briner-Mattern's testimony supported, quote, in essence, that of Airaghi. It did not. Briner-Mattern said she was at meetings where bribes were asked for. Airaghi said she was not at those meetings. Briner-Mattern said that Dr. Robert Ouko was working on a corruption report over the Molasses project. Airaghi never mentioned it.
There is also no evidence before the election of 1988 that the Molasses project or BAK's involvement was in any way blocked. On the contrary, the project was pushed forward. Stressing the urgency of the matter, Finance Minister Saitoti wrote to the Italian ambassador on the 14th of December asking for a soft loan of 25 million ecu to complete the project. The next day, Dr. Ouko countersigned the Tekint proposal and another for $1 million to conduct a feasibility study.
I have today countersigned the offer from Tekint contained in the proposal NR/104.
Briner-Mattern alleged that senior Kenyan government ministers removed the Kisumu Molasses project from the agenda of the Italian-Kenya bilateral meeting held in Rome on the 5th to 6th November 1987. This supposedly stopped it from getting any Italian funding. She named those responsible as Saitoti, Biwott, and Dalmas Otieno. But the cabinet did not endorse the project until November 3rd. Authorization wasn't signed until a day later, when the Kenyan delegation was already flying to Italy.
The Molasses project could not have been on the agenda at the bilateral meeting in early November 1987, an agenda that had been agreed months before. George Saitoti did attend the bilateral meeting. Nicholas Biwott did not, as the minutes prove. And the claim by Briner-Mattern that Dalmas Otieno was at the meeting is ludicrous. Otieno was not even a member of parliament at the time.
The rehabilitation of the molasses plant was an official government project, and every decision was recorded and filed. If Troon had read the government file, which was available to him, he would have known that what Briner-Mattern said was untrue. Central to the corruption allegations was that another company was promoted by Biwott to challenge one nominated by BAK. Dr. Ouko's sister, Dorothy Randiak, alleged that her brother had told her powerful people were against the Molasses project and that Biwott had put forward a rival company. Her testimony was hearsay, and she had not mentioned the subject in her previous statements. But, under questioning, when again shown official correspondence, Randiak had to admit what she said she had heard was wrong.
My lords, my piece of information is based on the conversation and discussions between me and my brother, and not on the documents tabled. But on the strength of the documents that you have read, that have followed, it would appear that there was no rivalry.
Domenico Airaghi's own statement to Scotland Yard confirmed that Randiak was mistaken.
On 16 June 1988, I returned to Kenya to renegotiate the Molasses project. As Tekint had withdrawn from the project and Asia Brown Broveri had replaced them, I dealt with Mr. Otieno.
Briner-Mattern also alleged that, unknown to Dr. Ouko, a feasibility study was undertaken for Biwott by a Canadian company. FC Schaffer was in fact an American company. The study was paid for by a US government grant of $240,000. Dr. Ouko was fully aware of all this. Once again, if Troon had read the government files, he would have known that Briner-Mattern's allegation was untrue.
All of the companies put forward for the Molasses project were put forward by BAK, by Domenico Airaghi and by Marianne Briner-Mattern, the last two of which were part of the same multinational Italian group. BAK had the contract with the Kenyan government. One of their nominated companies would get the contract for the Molasses project. Why would a company pay a bribe to win a contract against itself? There was no evidence of payments ever being made. There was no evidence of corruption.
But there's evidence that Airaghi and Briner-Mattern were themselves prepared to pay what they called commission. In a fax to Frank Adley of Kaplan and Stratton Advocates, Briner-Mattern said she and Airaghi offered commission payments to senior Kenyan ministers. Allegedly 2% to Professor Saitoti and 1% each to Elijah Mwangale and Dr. Ouko himself. The Kisumu Molasses project wasn't blocked. BAK were not frustrated. The problem was that Airaghi and Briner-Mattern did not come up with the money. And it seems they knew nothing at all about Molasses.
BAK nominated Tekint to undertake both the feasibility study and completion of the Kisumu Molasses project. It turned out Italian regulations did not allow the same company to do both. Airaghi and Briner-Mattern then nominated another company to take over the contract. But again, Italian regulations did not allow a transfer of the contract. And then both BAK and the companies they nominated started to ask the Kenyan government for money.
This was not what the cabinet had agreed to. It was Dalmas Otieno who called a halt to BAK's involvement in the Molasses project. In a question and answer interview with Scotland Yard, Otieno gave his reasons.
I personally interviewed Mr. Airaghi, and I considered he was not competent to handle the project and knew nothing about molasses. He initially asked for $1 million for the feasibility study. He then halved this sum and eventually settled for $300,000.
Are you aware that he would do this study free?
No, he wanted a letter of credit from me, which does not make it free. The last time I saw Mr. Airaghi in 1988, I told him my views and he never came back.
Briner-Mattern and Airaghi claimed Nicholas Biwott was behind Airaghi's expulsion from Kenya. But the decision too was Dalmas Otieno's. Airaghi said as much in a letter he wrote to Otieno in August 1989.
I've been informed that upon your request on March 15, I've been asked to leave Kenya for interference in government matters regarding the Kisumu Molasses rehabilitation.
Nowhere in the letter was Biwott's name mentioned. Bethuel Kiplagat told Troon why he thought Airaghi had been expelled.
I did receive a telephone call from immigration when Airaghi was asked to leave Kenya. He was apparently related to an allegation over an Italian deputy minister found with drugs. I warned Dr. Ouko to keep away from this person, but if they had contacts afterwards, I do not know.
The key testimony on which Troon based his theory that Dr. Ouko was writing a corruption report centered round communications Briner-Mattern claimed to have had with Ouko just before he was murdered. She told Troon she had written to Ouko on the 29th of January. After supposedly receiving it, Ouko phoned her on the 5th of February asking for additional correspondence to be posted to Kisumu. She claimed to have had a second call from Ouko on Saturday 10th, confirming he'd received her second package and was preparing a report to go to the president before he flew to the Gambia.
Troon's report says her allegations were of corruption against ministers and officials. Either he didn't read them, or if he did, he ignored it. And this is one of the biggest mistakes of his investigation. For Briner-Mattern's letters were not about corruption. They were, in fact, threatening Dr. Robert Ouko.
We believe that the reason for your non-involvement in our defense could be found when checking on the employment of the 50 workers, since we found out that they had been used also to campaign for you during election, and that part of the money was also used to pay the youth wingers. I herewith enclose a copy for your knowledge and enabling you to prepare your defense.
Her second letter was in the same vein.
We never understood why you did not get up to defend your point in this case. It was you who arranged and signed all the agreements. It is your area, and it is also your political future which they destroy.
But Troon only had Briner-Mattern's word that the letters had been sent, or the phone calls made. There's no record that Dr. Ouko had ever received or read them, or that they'd ever been sent at all.
I have found no independent evidence that Dr. Ouko actually received a letter. Papers in relation to the BAK allegations, which may have been in the possession of Dr. Ouko, have not been found by the British investigators.
And one of Troon's officers, Detective Inspector Graham Dennis, checked the records of all phone calls made from Dr. Ouko's office, his homes in Loresho and Koru, and even his Bata shoe shop in Kisumu from August 1989 to February 1990. Dennis found no record of any calls made to Briner-Mattern or BAK's office in Switzerland.
Despite thorough inquiries, I have not been able to obtain any evidence to corroborate these telephone calls.
As a motive for murdering Robert Ouko, the timing of the Kisumu Molasses theory is wrong. BAK were first introduced to the project formally in late July 1987. Their involvement with it in effect comes to an end with the election of 1988 and the appointment of Dalmas Otieno as Minister of Industry. Why would it be a pretext to murder Ouko over 2 years later?
I can only rely on what she says concerning the letters. The only supportive evidence is circumstantial.
Troon accepted into his report the testimony of Marianne Briner-Mattern and Domenico Airaghi because he said they were fundamentally truthful and honest and that they ran a reputable company. By any measure you wish to take, they were not honest or truthful, and their company did not have a reputation to defend.
Troon's reason for believing Briner-Mattern and Airaghi rested entirely on his personal assessment of their character. He said as much in his final report.
Before I outline these allegations, I must stress that in my opinion, both these witnesses have the reputation of both themselves and their company at stake in various African countries.
Troon was asked how he could make this assertion without checking into them and their company's background.
As far as I assessed those witnesses, they were truthful and honest witnesses, and having talked to them, my lords, it was conveyed to me that they were under a reputable company, and I accepted that at face value, and that is why I have included it in my reports, my lords.
She was a formidable lady, but nevertheless, I mean, having assessed her and interviewed her, I must say honestly that what she told me, I have to accept to be the truth, because what she told me was backed up by corroborative evidence, by paperwork evidence, evidence from other people as well. So I have to accept what she said to be true. I think basically she was an honest individual in relation to this investigation. I would consider her to be a credible witness.
Troon said in his final report, and he's said several times since, that there is evidence provided by Briner-Mattern and Airaghi that BAK were involved with the Molasses project. No one ever denied this. It's on public record in Kenya. It was minuted at cabinet and subcommittee level. What Troon does not have, in my estimation, is any evidence, anywhere, of fraud involving the Kisumu Molasses project.
But if their past was anything to go by, neither Briner-Mattern nor Airaghi were credible or honest.
On the 14th of March 1987, Domenico Airaghi had been convicted in the civil and criminal court in Milan on charges of attempted extortion. Throughout the entire time that Ouko was dealing with him, Airaghi was a convicted criminal, out on bail, awaiting his appeal. Although she was not charged, Briner-Mattern was his accomplice and gave evidence in Airaghi's defense. In passing sentence, the judge said,
"The particularly despicable nature of the offense, the attributes of an international fortune hunter displayed by Airaghi, all of the above justify a sentence of 2 years and 6 months imprisonment and a fine of 2 million lire."
In court, Marianne Briner-Mattern described herself as a secretary of International Escort, an employment agency. There was no mention of BAK. The judge dismissed her testimony.
Finally, a compassionate veil must be drawn over the testimony of Marianne Briner, who lived with Airaghi. The personal and professional relationship between Briner and Airaghi also reveals the full extent of the unreliability of the witness.
The judge at the Milan Court of Appeal upheld Airaghi's original conviction, and he too was dismissive of Briner-Mattern's testimony.
No credence should be given to the statement by the witness, Marianne Briner, not only due to the fact that she cohabits with Airaghi, but also that the information supplied by her is unsafe.
Airaghi's trials proved that he and Briner-Mattern had attempted blackmail by making menacing phone calls. In them, they threatened to reveal information that they claimed to have had. When he was exposed, Airaghi tried to defend himself by producing letters where the dates had been changed or for which there was no record of them having been sent or received. Briner-Mattern too was found by the judge to have falsified her evidence. As for their reputable company, BAK, it was a sham. There was no evidence of it ever trading. It didn't even legally exist. In the 3 years from 1987 to 1990, BAK gave 2 different addresses and had 4 different names. Only the last of these was formally incorporated under Swiss law, BAK Group Marianne Briner and Partner. And the partnership was registered on the 13th of February 1990, the day that Dr. Robert Ouko was murdered.
It could be a coincidence, but it's one hell of a coincidence. BAK were first involved with the Kisumu Molasses project in July 1987, 2 years and 7 months before Ouko was murdered. And the company is only fully incorporated on the day that he was shot.
Before that, Briner-Mattern was claiming $150,000 for alleged losses incurred over the Molasses project. After Ouko's death, this figure rose to just under $6 million. Much of this Troon would have known if only he had looked at the evidence available at the time. Troon was questioned as to whether he had asked to see the government's Molasses file when he interviewed Dalmas Otieno.
Did you make arrangements for the provision of this file to you after that meeting?
Not that I'm aware of, my lords, no.
Troon did not personally interview Domenico Airaghi. Troon admitted at the public inquiry that he did not read Airaghi's diaries because they're in Italian. Troon made no inquiries of the Italian or Swiss authorities, and he seems to have made no inquiries into the background of BAK, Briner-Mattern, or Domenico Airaghi.
Justice Evans Gishero posed the question, what should Troon have done?
I would have expected him, my lords, to first check on its registered office, then check on what its share capital was, to then check its reputation in Italy and Switzerland and in Africa, to check which projects they have carried out anywhere in the world. There are a number of things that have to be done, my lords. I am not a policeman, but I would think you cannot do without it.
But Troon didn't. The Kisumu Molasses theory was based on unsupported and conflicting testimony. It came from a convicted extortionist and his willing accomplice, Domenico Airaghi and Marianne Briner-Mattern. Their reputable company did not exist. They had lied to the Kenyan government, they had lied to Dr. Ouko, and they had lied to Scotland Yard detective John Troon. There was no evidence of corruption, and no corruption report was ever found. The Kisumu Molasses theory as a motive for Dr. Ouko's murder is completely without foundation.
If I was asked to speculate, my speculation would be that perhaps the molasses issue was peripheral to the motives for the killing of Dr. Robert Ouko.
But there were several other lines of inquiry. Dr. Ouko was said to be investigating corruption on a massive scale in the Kisumu area. The battle with his local political opponents in the 1988 election had also been a bitter one. There was said to be a major row in his family, particularly between Ouko and his brothers, and there were allegations that Ouko was facing problems with other women in his life. Could any one of them have been a motive for his murder?